Montana Territory, 1884. At 38, Lucian Harrowfield was, by every measure the newspapers cared to print, one of the richest men in the territory. Thousands of head of cattle, vast stretches of land, a stake in the railroad company besides, the papers had taken to calling him the Cattle Baron of Montana, a title he wore with about as much comfort as a coat 2 sizes too small. He lived on a fine property near the town of Briar Glen, surrounded by staff, ranch managers, and the sort of families who arranged themselves and their daughters wherever he happened to be standing. At balls and dinners, elegant young women competed for his attention. Bankers' daughters, railroad families, every one of them understanding, without needing it said aloud, that marrying Lucian Harrowfield meant prestige, security, and a lifetime of wealth. He trusted none of them. He had noticed, over enough seasons of his aunt's carefully arranged introductions, that women admired his mansion, his horses, and his name with genuine enthusiasm, and rarely showed much curiosity about the man attached to any of it. One young woman, 2 winters back, had spent an entire supper describing the improvements she'd make to his ballroom before she'd once asked what he did with his own evenings. He hadn't forgotten it. On the afternoon, everything changed. He'd sent his driver back to the ranch and taken a small buggy out alone, a rare habit of his, born less of practicality than of a plain wish to spend a few hours where no one required anything of him. A hard rain caught him some miles out, on a stretch of road he didn't know well, and it was there that his wheel found trouble. One wheel had sunk nearly to the axle in a soft patch of road, and every attempt to free it only buried it deeper. Lucian was coated to the elbows in mud and considerably out of patience by the time a young woman came striding out from a small farmhouse down the lane, sizing up the situation with the flat, practical look of someone who'd freed a stuck wagon more than once in her life. "You're only making it worse," she said, without preamble. "Stop pushing from behind. You need boards under the wheel and something to pull from the front." Her name, he learned once the wheel was finally free, was Charlotte Halloway, 26, sharp-eyed, with mud to her own elbows by the time the job was done, having fetched a length of rope and called her younger brother out from the barn to help haul the buggy clear. Lucian knew the name Harrowfield traveled a good deal farther across the territory than his face did, and Charlotte, mud-streaked and entirely unimpressed by his fine, ruined coat, showed no sign of recognizing either. He offered her money for the trouble. She refused it flatly. "Nobody ought to charge a person for keeping them out of the rain," she said, already coiling the rope back over her shoulder. With no way to continue on that night, and the rain showing no sign of easing, Charlotte's father came out to look the stranger over himself before extending any invitation. Amos Halloway was weathered and slow on his feet. An old injury to his hip, worsened by years of hard winters, kept him from most of the heavier farm work now. But his eyes were sharp enough, and he took his time studying Lucian before he spoke. "You've got an honest way of standing for a man covered in another family's mud," Amos said finally. "Come in and dry off. My son'll see to your horse." Eli, 16 and still gangly in the way boys are before they've grown into their own hands, led the buggy horse to the barn without much comment, though he eyed Lucian's fine, ruined coat the whole way with open curiosity. For the first time in years, Lucian sat down to supper in a small house at a plain table. Fresh bread, beans, a pitcher of milk, no servants, no silver, no rehearsed conversation waiting to be performed. Charlotte complained over that supper about the price of seed. She teased Eli for eating too fast. She asked Lucian, without a trace of deference, whether he always dressed so finely to push carriages out of ditches. "Not as a rule," he admitted, "though I confess the mud has considerably improved the coat's character." Amos watched the exchange with quiet amusement and asked Lucian once whether he preferred his coffee strong or weak. "However it comes," Lucian said, which seemed to satisfy the old man well enough. Later, when Charlotte had gone to see about the spare room, Amos added, low enough that only Lucian could hear it, She'll tell you plain if she doesn't like a thing. Don't mistake that for unkindness." "I hadn't planned to," Lucian said. Charlotte learned who he was the following morning, when a ranch hand came riding up the muddy lane calling him Mr. Harrowfield and explaining that half the property had spent the night worried sick. She went red to the roots of her hair, mortified at how freely she'd spoken to him the evening before, the teasing, the complaints about seed prices, the flat refusal of his money. "Mr. Harrowfield," she began, straightening with sudden, careful formality. "I hope you'll forgive—" "Don't," Lucian said before she could finish. "I've had a great deal of practice being spoken to carefully these last years. I found I preferred the other kind considerably more. Last night was the first honest supper I've had in longer than I care to admit." Charlotte looked at him a long moment, weighing whether he meant it. "All right," she said finally, "though I make no promises about my opinion of your coat." In the days that followed, he found reasons to come back. First, he said he wished to properly thank her family for the hospitality. Then he claimed he needed eggs, a claim Charlotte found difficult to credit given the size of his own kitchens. Then he offered to help fix the barn roof, though she privately doubted a man like him had ever held a hammer long enough to know which end did the work. She wasn't wrong. He climbed the ladder in a shirt entirely unsuited to the task, chose the wrong nail twice running, and tore the sleeve on a protruding board within the first quarter hour. Charlotte, holding the ladder steady below, didn't bother hiding her laughter. "You're gripping it like it insulted your mother," she called up. "It very nearly took my thumb," Lucian said, examining the offending nail with real suspicion. She climbed up part way to show him properly how to set the nail at an angle, how to let the hammer's weight do the work instead of his whole arm, and their hands brushed twice in the correcting of it, neither of them remarking on it, both of them noticing. By the time the roof was patched, his palms had earned 2 honest blisters and a shallow cut along one knuckle. Charlotte cleaned it at the kitchen table afterward with more care than the small wound strictly required, and asked, not unkindly, why a man with 100 hired hands bothered climbing his own ladders at all. "I wanted to see if I still could," Lucian said. "I've signed a great many papers this year. I couldn't tell you the last time I built anything with my own hands." "Well," Charlotte said, tying off the bandage, "you've built half a roof and 1 respectable blister. It's a start." He began riding into town alongside her on market days after that. And it was there, watching her work, that he learned something about her he hadn't fully understood from the farm alone. A cloth merchant tried one morning to talk her down 2 cents a yard on her homespun, with the easy condescension of a man who assumed a young woman wouldn't know her own prices. Charlotte didn't raise her voice. She simply named the fair price again, explained precisely what the wool and the dye had cost her, and waited, arms crossed, until the merchant paid it in full. Lucian, standing a few feet off, had to physically stop himself from stepping in. "You wanted to say something," Charlotte observed once the merchant had gone. "I did," Lucian admitted. "I stopped myself." "Good," she said. "I've been talking my own prices since I was 14. I don't need a rich man's voice added to mine to be believed." It was a small correction, but it stayed with him the whole ride home. The first time in longer than he could remember that someone had wanted his silence rather than his intervention. And the first time he'd understood the difference between helping a person and speaking over them. It was on one of those market days that Lucian first saw what Eli was capable of. A delivery horse spooked badly in the crowded street, rearing hard enough to scatter 2 stalls worth of goods, its owner too far off to reach the reins in time. Eli was there before anyone else, moving slow, talking low, one hand extended without hurry until the animal's ears came forward instead of back, and the whole street let out its breath at once when the horse finally settled under the boy's steady hand. "That's a gift," Lucian said, watching. "Not every man who works with horses his whole life has hands like that." "He's been better with animals than people since he could walk," Charlotte said, pride plain in her voice, even as she pretended to fuss over her scattered basket. Pa always said he'd waste it on a farm this size. Lucian said nothing further that day, but he filed the observation away carefully, the same way he filed away every piece of information that might someday prove useful to someone he'd come to care for. She showed him the creek in June, when the wildflowers along its bank were at their fullest, a stretch of water running clear and cold through a stand of aspen on a piece of his own land he'd never once bothered to visit in all the years he'd owned it. "I come here when I need to imagine a life bigger than the farm," Charlotte admitted, sitting on the bank with her boots off, her feet in the cold water. "Not because I don't love it, because sometimes a person needs somewhere to sit and want things without anyone watching." "I own thousands of acres," Lucian said, "and I couldn't tell you a single place on any of it I go simply because I like being there." They sat in silence after that, the kind that didn't need filling, and it was there, watching her face turned up toward the light with nothing to gain from him and nothing to prove, that Lucian understood, quietly, without ceremony, the way true things tend to arrive, that he had fallen in love with her. He didn't say so. It wasn't yet the moment for saying it. But he rode home that evening slower than usual, turning the knowledge over the whole 6 miles like something fragile he wasn't yet ready to set down. It was on the porch, one warm evening in early July, Amos and Eli long since asleep, that Lucian told her the rest of it. The part underneath the caution, the part the society women of Briar Glen had never once thought to ask about. "My father treated marriage as a business arrangement," he said. "He chose my mother for what her family's name could do for his railroad interests, and told me so plainly, more than once, as though it were simply good sense. I watched her grow quieter every year in that big house, surrounded by everything money could buy and precious little she'd actually chosen for herself." He turned his hat over in his hands. "There was a woman, some years back, who spoke of my ballroom for the better part of an evening before she once asked what I did with my own time. I decided that night I'd rather be alone than spend my life being chosen for what I owned instead of who I was." Charlotte didn't offer comfort he hadn't asked for. She only said, "That's a lonely thing to decide at your age," and let the rest sit between them, unfinished, the way most true things were at first. The romance became impossible to mistake during a summer party in Briar Glen. Lucian's aunt, Cordelia, had invited a long list of hopeful suitors and their families, plainly hoping he would finally settle on a wife. Charlotte, in town selling butter and cloth, ended up helping with the party's preparations in the kitchen, her sleeves rolled and her hands full of dishes, while wealthy women danced in the next room. Winifred Wainwright, the banker's daughter everyone expected Lucian to marry, found her way into the kitchen not long after, looking considerably less delighted by the evening than her fine dress suggested. "You're the Halloway girl," Winifred said, without much ceremony. "Everyone's talking about you." "I imagine they are," Charlotte said, not looking up from the tray she was arranging. Winifred studied her a moment. "For what it's worth," she said, "I don't particularly want to marry him either. My father wants his railroad. His aunt wants my family's name attached to this house. It appears you and I are the 2 least consulted people in whatever's being arranged for us." She said it without malice, almost with relief, and left Charlotte considerably more curious about her than she'd expected to be. Lucian found Charlotte there shortly after. "Why aren't you inside?" he asked. "Dresses like mine don't belong in there," Charlotte said. "The problem isn't the dress," Lucian said. "It's the people who haven't yet learned how to see who's wearing it." He asked her to dance. She hesitated, knowing every eye in the room would find them the moment they crossed the threshold. She accepted anyway. When they walked into the ballroom together, the conversation thinned to almost nothing. The hopeful young women eyed Charlotte's work-marked hands with open disdain. Aunt Cordelia started forward to intervene, but Lucian led Charlotte straight to the center of the floor before she could reach them. "Do you intend to scandalize the entire town?" Charlotte asked, low, as they began to move together. "I've spent years letting this town decide who ought to stand beside me," Lucian said. "Tonight, That's finished. The trouble arrived that September, earlier in the season than anyone expected. A hard frost swept through overnight and destroyed a good portion of the Halloway cornfield. The stalks blackened by morning, weeks of work lost in a single cold night. It was in the difficult days that followed that Amos finally admitted, heavily, what he'd been carrying alone. "There's an old debt against this land," he told Charlotte and Eli both, unable quite to meet their eyes. "Taken out the year your mother passed, to see us through the worst of it. I've been paying it down slow, telling myself I'd have it settled before either of you needed to know the weight of it. The bank's grown impatient. With the corn gone, I don't know how we'll meet the note." Charlotte sat with that a long moment, understanding all at once the years her father had spent quietly worried while she'd assumed the farm's troubles began and ended with weather. Lucian offered to pay the debt outright the moment he learned of it. Charlotte refused immediately. "I won't have anyone believe I came near you to save this farm," she said. "And I won't start whatever this is between us already owing you my own front door." Lucian was stung by the refusal at first, but working alongside her family through those hard days that followed, hauling what could be salvaged from the ruined field, mending fence in the cold, saying little because there was little use in saying much. He watched her carry the weight of the crisis without once asking anyone to carry it for her, and understood, plainly, that her independence was exactly the thing he'd fallen in love with at the creek in June. It was watching him work beside her family, sleeves rolled, without once trying to command the situation or buy his way clear of the discomfort, that Charlotte came to her own understanding, quieter than his, arriving somewhere between one cold morning and the next, that whatever this was between them had become something she wasn't willing to lose. Instead of settling the debt himself, Lucian mentioned, only once and without pressing the matter, that the rail crew working a line some 6 miles east had been asking around for a reliable local supplier of butter, eggs, and mended cloth. Charlotte rode out herself to speak with the crew's foreman, brought samples of her own butter and a length of her finest weave, and negotiated the contract on her own terms. A modest, honest arrangement, paying no better than any other supplier the foreman dealt with, but steady enough to see the family through the winter the frost had threatened. Lucian, separately, mentioned Eli's gift with horses to a breeder he knew by reputation rather than close friendship. Not a favor called in, only an honest word about a boy whose skill he'd watched settle a spooked horse in the middle of a crowded street. The breeder came out to see for himself, watched Eli work a nervous colt for the better part of an hour, and offered the boy an apprenticeship on the strength of what he'd seen with his own eyes. The farm began, slowly, to recover. At the same time, the pressure on Lucian only grew. His business partners wanted him married to Winifred Wainwright, and Winifred herself, for all her earlier honesty in the kitchen, warned him plainly one afternoon that her father would not take the insult of a broken understanding lightly. "I don't want this marriage any more than you do," she told him. "But I'd rather you know what you're risking than be surprised by it later. My father doesn't lose railroad investments gracefully." Aunt Cordelia's warning cut deeper, precisely because it came from someone who loved him. "They will smile at her to her face and gut her the moment her back is turned," she said. "I watched it happen to a woman I cared for once, Lucian, long before you were old enough to remember her. She didn't survive this town's cruelty with her spirit intact. I won't watch it happen again to a girl who deserves better than what Briar Glen will do to her." Lucian understood, hearing it, that his aunt wasn't his enemy in this. She was afraid, in the particular way people are afraid when they've already watched a similar wound happen once before. He began, without discussing it with Charlotte first, to pull away, convinced, in the particular way a man convinces himself when he hasn't the courage to say the real reason aloud, that he was protecting her from a world that would never fully accept her. He canceled a visit the following week, citing business in Helena that could easily have waited. He canceled a second the week after, with no excuse offered at all. Charlotte noticed the silence long before she understood the reason for it. She kept to her usual work, told herself it meant nothing, and found, by the second missed Saturday, that she no longer believed her own reassurances. She rode to his property herself, rather than wait any longer for an explanation that wasn't coming on its own. Lucian tried to explain that a life beside him would mean more than luxury, gossip, endless obligations, people who would judge her origins at every turn, and rejected suitors who would never quite forgive her for being chosen over them. "You deserve a quiet life," he told her, "away from all my obligations." "I've survived hunger and winter and debt," Charlotte said. "I'm not frightened of women in expensive dresses, Lucian." She held his gaze steadily. "Is that truly what you want? Or is it simply one more decision made by a man who's decided he knows what's best for me without troubling to ask?" He didn't have an answer for that. She left without one, and the question stayed with him considerably longer than any argument would have. For 3 nights, Lucian discovered that money could purchase almost anything, except an honest answer to the question she'd left him with. He thought of his father, arranging his mother's whole life without once asking what she wanted from it. He thought of the mansion, grown quiet again in Charlotte's absence in a way he'd only just begun to notice before she'd entered it. He thought of the creek and the silence that hadn't needed filling, and understood, finally, that protecting someone by deciding for them was simply his father's mistake wearing kinder language. On the 3rd day, he rode to the small farm. Charlotte was gathering wash off the line before the coming rain, wearing a plain dress, mud still on her boots from the morning's chores. "I'm not here to ask you to marry me," he said, before she could speak. "I came to say I was wrong, and to ask your forgiveness for deciding your life was mine to arrange, the same way my father once arranged my mother's. I have no right to ask anything further of you until I've earned back the trust I spent these last weeks losing." Charlotte studied him a long moment. "That's a considerably better start than the last thing you said to me," she said, and didn't offer him more than that. Not forgiveness outright, only the room to begin earning it. He didn't press her. He wrote instead to his business partners, informing them plainly that he would not be marrying Winifred Wainwright or anyone else chosen for the sake of a railroad investment, and that any partner unwilling to continue on those terms was welcome to sell his share. He told his aunt the truth of his feelings without asking her permission for them, though he thanked her sincerely for the fear that had driven her warning. He came back to the farm 3 more times over the following weeks to help with the last of the autumn work, to sit with Amos over coffee, to listen to Eli talk about the Breeders' Ranch with more hope in his voice than either of them had heard from the boy in years, and asked nothing of Charlotte beyond her company, offered as freely or as carefully as she chose to give it. It was Charlotte, in the end, who closed the distance first. He asked her to marry him at the creek in October, the wildflowers long since gone, but the water running as clear as it had in June. "I can offer you a grand house, servants, comfort," he said. "I don't want you to accept any of it for those reasons." "I don't need the mansion," Charlotte said. "Then what do you want?" Lucian asked. "A life where I can still recognize the man I married," she said, "and where I can still recognize myself inside it besides." Lucian promised her she would never have to give up the farm, her family, or the plain way she'd been raised. He didn't intend to turn her into a society wife, and told her so plainly. Then he asked her to marry him. Charlotte accepted, on one condition. "We'll divide our time between your property and this one," she said, "and you'll keep working in that barn until you learn to swing a hammer without injuring yourself in the process." "That may take some years," Lucian admitted. "I've got patience," Charlotte said. "I raised a brother through his loudest years. You'll manage." The wedding took place at the creek that following spring, among the same wildflowers that had first shown Lucian what he was capable of feeling. It was nothing like the grand affair Briar Glen society had expected of him. Wooden tables, wildflowers instead of imported blooms, and Amos, steadier on his feet than he'd been in years, playing fiddle exactly the way Charlotte had once told Lucian she preferred over any orchestra brought in from Helena. Eli came home from the Breeders' Ranch for the occasion, taller and steadier than he'd been in autumn, and stood up beside his sister with unmistakable pride. Aunt Cordelia sat in the front row, having long since made her peace with the match. And Winifred Wainwright came too, out of genuine goodwill rather than curiosity, having found, in the months since, a suitor of her own that neither father nor railroad had arranged for her. Several of Lucian's old suitors came as well, some clearly hoping to see Charlotte look out of place among the wealth she'd married into. Instead, they watched Lucian look at her the way he had never once looked at any of them. Months later, Charlotte crossed the great hall of the mansion in an elegant dress, sleeves still rolled from a morning spent helping at the farm before she'd changed for the evening. Lucian arrived home from a business trip to find the house full, Amos and Eli visiting for the week, neighbors gathered, laughter carrying from the dining room all the way to the front door. No one lowering their voice simply because the master of the house had walked in. He found her on the small porch he'd built himself the summer before, still slightly crooked, but sound enough to hold 2 chairs and 2 cups of coffee. "Did you finally learn to use that hammer?" she asked, handing him the second cup. "Well enough to build a place for 2, Lucian said, and sat down beside her. He owned land, cattle, money, and influence enough to shape half the territory's future. But it was a poor farm girl, with nothing to offer at first but a length of rope and a refusal to be paid for common decency, who finally taught him what it meant to have a home. Every wealthy woman in Briar Glen chased Lucian Harrowfield for his name, his land, and his fortune. It was Charlotte Halloway who showed him the one thing none of them ever thought to try: seeing the man instead of the money, and loving him carefully enough to refuse him when refusing was the honest thing to do. May God bless each and every one of you who listened today. Until next time, keep riding.